Let me paint you a picture. It's a Tuesday evening in October. The kind of evening where the air smells like wood smoke and old money, because we're in Northern Virginia, and the house we're pulling up to has 6 bedrooms, a circular driveway, and a wine cellar that probably cost more than my first year of law school. My sister Michelle is gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles have gone pale. She hasn't looked at me since we left the highway, and then, right as she turns off the ignition, she finally speaks. "Don't embarrass me tonight, Katrina." Her voice is measured, clipped, like she's reminding herself to stay calm. Tom's father is a federal judge. A federal judge. Do you understand what that means? These are not regular people. So please, for once in your life, just sit there, smile, and don't say anything that makes me regret bringing you. I said nothing. I just looked out the window at the warm light spilling through those big colonial windows, and I let her words wash over me, the way I'd been letting her words wash over me for 28 years. We walked in. Tom greeted us at the door. His mother, Raina, elegant, warm, the kind of woman who makes you feel seen in 30 seconds flat, hugged us both. And then, from across the parlor, Tom's father descended the staircase. The Honorable Judge Daniel Lockwood. Tall, silver-haired, commanding presence. The kind of man who makes a room go quiet just by walking into it. He crossed the room with his hand extended toward Michelle first, then toward me, and the moment his eyes met mine, everything stopped. His whole face shifted, not in confusion, not in uncertainty, in recognition. "Your Honor," he said warmly, extending his hand toward me with the kind of deference that powerful men reserve for other powerful people. "I didn't know you'd be joining us tonight. It's wonderful to see you again." Michelle's wineglass hit the floor. If you've ever been the person in the room that your own family was ashamed of, if you've ever been introduced as the disappointment, the difficult one, the one who didn't turn out the way we hoped, stay with me. Because this story? It didn't start that night in that parlor. It started 28 years ago, in a house where the wrong daughter was always the favorite. And if that hits somewhere close to home, if you know exactly what it feels like to be measured and found lacking by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, please subscribe, because every single video I make is for you. It's for the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who kept going anyway. Hit that subscribe button, and don't go anywhere, because it gets so much deeper than a dropped wine glass, I promise you that. My name is Katrina Tancredi. I'm 28 years old. I live in Boston now, a 1-bedroom apartment in the South End with exposed brick walls and a window that looks out over the rooftops. I have a coffee maker that I love more than most people, a small collection of houseplants that have somehow survived my schedule, and a job that I worked a decade of my life to earn. But let me take you back, way back. Because to understand that night at the Lockwood dinner table, you need to understand where I came from. My parents, Wayne and Octavia Tancredi, built a successful accounting firm in Northern Virginia from the ground up. By the time Michelle and I were in middle school, we were what people in our neighborhood called comfortable. Country club memberships, annual vacations, the right zip code. The kind of life where your kids go to private school and your car never has more than 30,000 miles on it before you trade it in. Wayne Tancredi is the kind of man who communicates love through provision. He works hard, he provides well, and he expects excellence in return. Not warmth, not vulnerability, excellence. Octavia Tancredi, my mother, is gentler on the surface, but she has a way of loving you that comes with conditions attached, and the longer you know her, the more clearly you see the fine print. Michelle was the child they understood, straight A student, debate team captain, prom queen, full scholarship to Georgetown. She spoke their language, achievement, optics, strategic relationships. Michelle knew exactly how to move through the world they'd built, and she did it with the kind of confident grace that made my parents glow every time they talked about her. I was the other one. Not bad, not troubled, just different. Where Michelle was loud and magnetic, I was quiet and interior. I read constantly. I spent more time in the library than at family dinners. I wasn't interested in being seen. I was interested in understanding things, in pulling ideas apart and figuring out how they worked. My parents didn't know what to do with that. My father would come home from a long day and ask Michelle about her debate tournament, glowing when she talked about the trophy, the argument strategy, the standing ovation. Then he'd turn to me and ask what I'd been doing. And I'd say something like, "I've been reading about constitutional law," and his eyes would glaze over a little and he'd nod and move on. I learned early that I wasn't the child my parents could brag about at cocktail parties. Michelle was the story they told. I was the footnote they skipped. When I was 14, I won a statewide essay competition on civil rights law. The prize was a small scholarship fund and a feature in the State Bar Association's quarterly newsletter. I remember showing my parents the letter. My mother smiled and said, "That's lovely, sweetheart," and then turned back to Michelle's college application essay, which she was helping her polish for the third time that week. My father nodded and said, "Make sure you put that on your resume." That was it. 3 days later, Michelle made the honor roll, which she did every semester, and my parents took her out to her favorite restaurant to celebrate, Steak and Lobster, the good place downtown with the leather booths and the candles. I stayed home. I told myself it didn't sting. I was good at telling myself things didn't sting. By the time I was 17, I had developed what I now recognize as a masterful ability to disappear in a crowd. Not physically, I was always there, sitting at the dinner table, showing up to family events, saying the right words at the right times. But emotionally, I had built a wall around myself that was so smooth and so complete that most people couldn't find a door. I protected myself by making myself invisible. If they couldn't see me, they couldn't dismiss me, and if they couldn't dismiss me, it hurt less. My closest friends during those years were a handful of people who, like me, existed slightly outside the social mainstream. There was Keisha, who was brilliant and funny and perpetually exasperated by the world's inability to keep up with her. There was Dante, who wanted to be a documentary filmmaker and spent every weekend with a secondhand camera recording things that other people walked past without noticing. And there was Medina, who had come to our school from Uzbekistan in 9th grade and navigated the social landscape of a Northern Virginia private school with a kind of quiet dignity that I deeply admired. These people saw me, and they were enough. But home was a different story. As the years went on, Michelle's shine only grew brighter, and somehow, the brighter she shone, the more I seemed to fade in comparison. It wasn't intentional cruelty from my parents. I understand that now, with the benefit of distance and therapy, and a lot of long runs along the Charles River in Boston. They simply had a type, a specific vision of what success looked like, and I didn't fit it. What they didn't understand was that I was building something, quietly, steadily, in the way that foundations are built, underground, invisible, but load-bearing. I graduated high school with a 4.1 GPA and a full merit scholarship to Boston University. Not Georgetown, which is where Michelle had gone, and which my parents held up as the gold standard of academic achievement, but BU, which is an extraordinary school, and which I chose deliberately because it had one of the best pre-law programs in the country, and it was a plane ride away from Northern Virginia. Distance, I had decided, was survival. My parents were polite about my scholarship. They said the right things. But I remember my mother mentioning at a family dinner that summer that Katrina's going to Boston in the same tone of voice she used to describe mild inconveniences, like traffic or a canceled flight. Michelle, to her credit, gave me a genuine hug before I left and told me she was proud of me. I don't think she was performing it. I think she meant it. That's the complicated thing about Michelle. She has genuine warmth buried underneath all the competition and the need to be the best. I've always known it was there. I've just spent most of my life waiting for it to show up consistently. In Boston, something happened to me. I came alive. Without the constant weight of comparison, without the ambient hum of my parents' disappointment, I discovered who I actually was. And who I actually was turned out to be someone with a ferocious, almost physical love of the law, of justice, of the systems that hold societies together and the ways they fail, the people they're supposed to protect. I threw myself into my undergraduate studies with an intensity that surprised even me. I took every political science and pre-law course I could get my hands on. I joined the mock trial team and the Law Review Journal. I worked summers as a paralegal at a civil rights firm in Cambridge, where a brilliant woman named Emma Smith, a senior partner with 20 years of federal litigation experience, took one look at my work and told me I had a gift. Emma became a mentor. She was exacting and direct and absolutely unwilling to accept anything less than my best, and I loved her for it, in a way I never quite knew how to express out loud. She was the first person in my professional life who saw me clearly and pushed me harder because of what she saw, not despite it. I got into law school, not just any law school, one of the top 5 in the country, on a full scholarship, with a clinical placement in federal public defense that I had competed for alongside students from schools with names that make parents beam at dinner parties. I did not call home to celebrate. I had learned by then that celebration was something I kept for the people who had earned the right to witness it. Law school was the hardest thing I have ever done. It is designed to break you, to take everything you think you know about thinking and remake it from the ground up. The first year you sleep about 4 hours a night, you read until your eyes blur. You argue in cold, fluorescent-lit classrooms with professors who ask you questions designed not to be answered, designed instead to show you the edges of your own reasoning. I loved it. I had a study group that became my family. There was Mark Kirkman, who was brilliant and anxious and stress-baked cookies for the whole building during finals week. There was Finn, short for Finley, who was the kind of person who could explain the most complicated legal theory in plain English while eating a sandwich, and who later became one of the youngest federal public defenders in Massachusetts history. There was Braden, who was from rural Alabama and had more grit and raw intelligence than anyone I have ever known, and who spent 3 years fighting off imposter syndrome before he finally let himself believe he belonged there. And there was Raina, not Tom's mother, a different Raina, who was my closest friend through those years, and who is now a district attorney in Chicago. We pushed each other. We argued about everything. We stayed up until 2 a.m. debating the philosophy of justice and the practical realities of a system that too often fails the people who need it most. We cried during bar prep. We held each other accountable. We showed up. I graduated in the top 3% of my class. I clerked for a federal appellate judge, a woman named Judge Octavia Morris, no relation to my mother, and I spent 2 of the most formative years of my professional life reading briefs, drafting opinions, and watching the machinery of federal justice operate up close. After my clerkship, I joined a federal public defender's office in Boston. Then I moved into a role at a civil rights nonprofit, the kind of work that doesn't make you rich but makes you feel at the end of every single day like you are doing what you were put on this earth to do. And along the way, something I had never expected started to happen. People started to know my name. Not in the way Michelle's name was known, at dinner parties, on social media, in the carefully curated world of Northern Virginia upper-middle-class life, in a different world, a quieter one. One where the currency wasn't Instagram followers or country club memberships, but where it meant something. I argued cases before federal judges. I wrote briefs that got cited in appellate decisions. I was featured in a Massachusetts Bar Association profile on emerging voices in civil rights law. I received an appointment to a federal advisory committee on criminal justice reform, which is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds, and also one of the most meaningful things I've ever been part of. And I met people like Daniel Lockwood. Because the legal world, the real legal world, the federal courts, the bar associations, the reform commissions, is smaller than you might think. It is a world of relationships built over years, of faces you recognize across conference tables and courthouse hallways, of reputations that precede you in ways you don't always know about until someone extends their hand and says your name. I had met Judge Lockwood 3 times before that October dinner, once at a federal judicial conference in Washington, where I had been invited to present on criminal justice reform, once at a bar association event in Boston where he had been the keynote speaker, and once, briefly, in the hallway of a federal courthouse after a hearing where I had argued a case he had later mentioned, in conversation with another judge, as an example of particularly strong advocacy. He remembered me. Of course he remembered me. Because in the world where I actually lived, the world my family had never bothered to see, I was someone. I need to stop here for just a second, because I know some of you are right in the middle of this, right in the part of the story where the recognition hasn't happened yet, where you're still the one being underestimated, still the one whose name your family skips over at dinner, still the one grinding in a world that your parents don't understand and your siblings have never asked about. And if that's you, I need you to hear this. The work you are doing right now, in the quiet, when no one is watching, when no one is celebrating you, that work is real, it is accumulating, it has weight and mass and direction, and you do not need anyone's permission to keep going. But I also need you to do something for me. If this story is reaching something in you, something old and tender and true, please subscribe to this channel. Because every time someone new joins this community, it reminds me why I keep telling these stories. You are not alone in this, and neither am I. Subscribe. And stay, because we are about to get to the dinner table. And trust me, you want to be there for what happens next. Michelle called me in September. This was unusual to begin with. Michelle and I talked maybe once every 6 weeks, surface-level conversations about family logistics, holiday plans, whether our parents' health was holding up. Not because we actively hated each other, but because we had drifted into a comfortable distance that felt safer than closeness. She was calling, she said, because she wanted to invite me to a dinner, an important dinner. Tom's parents were coming up from their estate in McLean to spend a long weekend with the family. Tom had finally told his parents about his and Michelle's engagement. Yes, she was engaged now, to Tom Lockwood, her boyfriend of 4 years who was a corporate attorney with a practice in D.C., and this was going to be a proper introduction dinner. The families together for the first time. Mom and Dad will be there, she said. Tom's sister Emma and her husband Dave, and a few of Tom's friends, Johnny and Mike I think, maybe Finn. Actually, I'm not sure about Finn, she paused. I want you to come. I was surprised. I won't pretend I wasn't. Michelle had not invited me to a significant family event in nearly 2 years. I'd like to meet Tom's parents properly, I said carefully. I think that would be nice. Great. Another pause. Then, just Katrina please, dress appropriately, and maybe don't bring up work stuff. Tom's dad is a federal judge, a really prominent one. He has opinions about the public defender world. I held the phone away from my face for a moment, breathed. I'll be there, I said. She thanked me. We hung up. I sat in my apartment in Boston and looked out at the rooftops and felt the old familiar weight settle somewhere behind my sternum. That specific heaviness that comes from being invited somewhere as a managed presence rather than as yourself. Dress appropriately. Don't bring up work. Be there but not too much there. Be my sister but quietly. I almost said no. I want to be clear about that. I almost called her back and said I had a conflict, fabricated something professional sounding, and bowed out. The version of me from 10 years ago absolutely would have done that. But I didn't, because something in me had shifted over those years. The version of me that had argued in front of federal judges, that had presented to advisory committees, that had walked into rooms full of powerful people and held my ground. That version of me was done being small. I wasn't going to dinner to prove anything. I wasn't going to dinner to show off, or to one-up my sister, or to win some invisible competition that only exists inside our family's particular psychology. I was going because I am Katrina Tancredi, and I belong at every table I choose to sit at. I booked my flight. The drive from the airport was where Michelle made her opening move. She had picked me up, which I thought was a generous gesture, right up until approximately 8 minutes into the drive, when the briefing began. Tom's family is very traditional, she said, eyes on the road. His mother Raina is lovely, you'll like her, but his father, she trailed off, recalibrated. His father is old school, very accomplished, he has strong opinions. Okay, I said. He's on the federal bench, district court. He was appointed about 15 years ago, and before that he was a U.S. attorney. He has. She chose her next words carefully. He has a certain view of the legal world. The kind of people who go into high-powered law versus the kind of people who go into public interest work. There it was. I see, I said. I'm just saying, if the conversation goes there, maybe don't make it a whole thing. You know how you can get about your work. I turned to look out the window. The Northern Virginia landscape was sliding past, the manicured lawns, the colonial facades, the world where I had grown up feeling like a misfit. Michelle, I said, how do I get about my work? You know, passionate, intense. You can make people feel like they're being judged. I didn't respond to that. I filed it. I turned it over quietly in the part of my mind where I keep things that need to be examined later, in the privacy of my own reflection. She told me not to embarrass her. She told me his dad was a federal judge. I said nothing. We parked. We walked to the door. Raina Lockwood answered. Warm, genuine, exactly as lovely as Michelle had promised. Tom was right behind her, tall and pleased to see us both, hugging me with the straightforward friendliness of a man who had heard enough about me from Michelle to form a mostly accurate picture. Johnny and Mike were already there, Tom's friends from law school, both in corporate practice, both polished and easygoing. Emma, Tom's sister, was in the kitchen helping with something that smelled extraordinary. Her husband Dave poured us drinks. Raina introduced everyone with the practiced warmth of a woman who knows how to make a room feel like home. And then Judge Lockwood came down the stairs. He was exactly what I expected, tall, silver-haired, the kind of bearing you earn over decades of making consequential decisions. He moved through the room like a man who is comfortable in his authority without needing to perform it, which is actually a quality I deeply respect, because it's rarer than you'd think. He shook Michelle's hand. He shook mine. And then he stopped. His eyes met mine, and something happened in his face. Not confusion, not searching. Recognition, clear and immediate and certain. Your Honor, he said, with a warmth that was entirely unperformed. I didn't realize you'd be joining us. It's wonderful to see you again. Across the room, Michelle's wine glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter dramatically. It hit the edge of the coffee table and cracked, spilling red wine across the cream-colored carpet and Raina's decorative throw. There was a flurry of movement, Dave grabbing napkins, Emma appearing from the kitchen, Raina reassuring everyone that it was fine, it's just a glass. Michelle stood absolutely still. Her face had gone the color of parchment. She was looking at me. Judge Lockwood, Daniel, as he insisted I call him, sat across from me at dinner and did what judges do when they encounter someone whose work they've been following. He asked questions, real ones. The kind that assume intelligence and are designed to go somewhere. He asked about the advisory committee work. He asked about a brief I had filed in a particularly complex civil rights case that had apparently made its way through the judicial grapevine. He asked about my perspective on a recent Supreme Court decision, and when I gave it, with precision and some genuine passion, he leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man who is genuinely enjoying himself. I've been following your work, he said at one point. Since that conference in Washington, you remember the reform panel you presented on. I thought then that you were going to be a formidable advocate. I remember it very well, I said. Your comments after the panel were genuinely useful. I incorporated some of that thinking into a brief the following year. He was pleased by that. He said so. Across the table, my parents were very, very quiet. My father, Wayne Tancredi, who had spent my entire childhood waiting for me to become something he could describe at a cocktail party, sat with his fork suspended halfway to his plate for what felt like a very long time. My mother's expression was something I don't have an exact word for. It was a mixture of pride and something older and more complicated, the look of a woman who is recalculating in real time a story she's been telling herself for decades. Michelle ate very little. She answered questions from Raina with her social autopilot engaged, gracious, charming, perfectly appropriate. But her eyes kept coming back to me, and each time they did, I saw something working itself out behind them. Something she wasn't quite ready to name yet. Braden texted me from Chicago around 8:30. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket and ignored it. Raina was asking me about Boston, about the neighborhood, about whether I had found a community there, and she asked with such genuine interest that I found myself actually talking, really talking, the way I rarely get to talk at family events, about the city I had chosen, the life I had built, the work that drove me. "She's incredibly accomplished," Judge Lockwood said to Tom at one point, and he said it about me, gesturing in my direction with a kind of collegial respect that I recognized, but that felt surreal in this context, in this room, with these people. Tom looked at Michelle. Michelle looked at her plate. Johnny and Mike, to their credit, were thoroughly entertained. I caught Mike hiding a smile at one point. Finn, who had made it after all, arriving late and slightly windswept, sat down next to me, introduced himself, and within 10 minutes was deep in a conversation with Judge Lockwood about federal sentencing guidelines that I had to actively stop myself from taking over. It was a good dinner. Despite everything, or maybe because of it, it was genuinely, unexpectedly, a very good dinner. My parents drove me back to the hotel afterward. Michelle had her own car. She sent me a text at 10:15 that night that said, "We need to talk." I texted back, "Yes, we do." But first, the car ride with Wayne and Octavia Tancredi. My father drove. My mother sat in the passenger seat. I sat in the back, looking at the dark Virginia road sliding past, and waited. My father broke the silence first. He cleared his throat in the way he does when he's working himself up to something. "Katrina," he said, "I didn't know you knew Judge Lockwood." "We've met at a few professional events," I said. "He seemed to think very highly of you." "I think he values the work I do." Another silence. Longer. The car hummed. "Your work," my father said carefully, "what you do. I don't think I fully understood what that looked like. And here is the thing about Wayne Tancredi that I have spent most of my adult life reconciling myself to. He is not a cruel man. He is not a bad man. He is a man who built his identity around a very specific vision of what success should look like, and he applied that vision to his daughters without ever stopping to wonder if one of them had her own vision that was just as valid, just as significant, just as real." "I know you haven't," I said. And I said it without accusation. Not because I wasn't still carrying hurt, I was, and I am, but because I have done enough work on myself to understand the difference between a fight and a conversation. "I'm proud of you," he said. And then, after a pause that lasted about 3 seconds too long, "I should have said that more." I looked out the window. I felt something in my chest, not release exactly, not the big dramatic moment of forgiveness that stories like this are supposed to arrive at, something quieter, something more like the first exhale after holding your breath for a very long time. "Yeah," I said, "you should have." My mother reached back between the seats and put her hand on my knee. She didn't say anything. Octavia Tancredi is not a woman who finds words easily when the moment is tender. But she put her hand on my knee and she kept it there, and that was something. That was something. She knocked on my hotel room door at 11:15. I had known she would come. Michelle is not a person who lets things sit. She processes by confronting, and she had spent the entire dinner sitting with something that needed confrontation. I opened the door. She looked, and I say this without satisfaction, genuinely diminished, not embarrassed in the surface way she'd been at the dinner table, diminished in a deeper way. The way a story you've been telling about yourself starts to feel when the evidence against it becomes undeniable. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back and let her in. She sat on the edge of the bed. I sat in the chair by the window, and for a moment we just looked at each other, two sisters in a hotel room in Northern Virginia, carrying 30 years of complicated history between us. "I didn't know," she said finally, "about any of it, the committee, the cases, She gestured vaguely. "The fact that you know federal judges, the fact that they call you Your Honor." I know you didn't, I said. You never asked. That landed. I watched it land. I hadn't said it to wound her. I said it because it was true, and because true things need to be said even when they sting. I introduced you as the disappointment, she said. It came out almost like a question, like she was trying to process the absurdity of it. I know, I said. I heard you. God, Katrina. She pressed her hands over her face. I am so sorry. I don't even know why I said that. I think I was nervous and I defaulted to the old story, the one about you and me, the one where I'm the successful one and you're the disappointment, I finished. She flinched. I had been telling myself that story for so long, she said quietly. I didn't even realize I still believed it. I think I needed to believe it. Because if you're the disappointing one, then I'm what? The golden one? The one who got it right? You did get a lot of things right, Michelle, I said, and I meant it. You have a good life. You're marrying someone who clearly loves you. His family is wonderful. Your career is successful. None of that is a lie. But it doesn't make me better than you. No, I said, it doesn't. She was quiet for a long time. I told you not to embarrass me tonight, she said. I told you not to bring up your work, because I was worried. I was genuinely worried that a federal judge would look down on you, on us, and the whole time. The whole time, Daniel Lockwood already knew exactly who I was, I said. Yeah, she laughed, a short, startled, almost helpless sound. Yeah, the whole time. I uncurled from the chair and sat next to her on the bed. Not because everything was resolved, not because the hurt had vanished or the patterns had been undone, but because she was my sister, and she was sitting in a hotel room trying to dismantle a story she had been living inside for 30 years, and that takes courage. I don't need you to suddenly be my biggest cheerleader, I said. I'm not asking for that. I built my life without that. But I need you to stop making me small so you can feel bigger. Can you do that? She turned to look at me. Her eyes were bright. I can try, she said. Trying is enough, I said. Trying is where it starts. We stayed up until almost 1 a.m, talking, really talking, maybe for the first time in a decade, about our childhood, our parents, the invisible competition that had shaped so much of what we'd become, about the years of dinners where I'd been invisible and Michelle had been celebrated, about the ways our parents' love, however real, had come wrapped in conditions that left marks on both of us. Michelle told me something I hadn't known, that she had spent years envying my freedom. My willingness to move to Boston, to build something outside the family's orbit, to become someone that wasn't defined by Wayne and Octavia Tancredi's expectations. She had been the golden child, yes, but golden children carry a weight too. The weight of performing, of maintaining, of being the story your parents tell, forever. I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd been so busy surviving my invisibility that I hadn't considered what it cost her to be so relentlessly seen. We were both, it turned out, carrying things the other hadn't known about. That's what families do when communication breaks down. Everyone walks around loaded down with unspoken weight, assuming the other people in the room have it easier. I flew back to Boston the next afternoon. Before I left, Tom's mother Raina found me in the kitchen where I was having coffee and sat down across from me with the easy directness of a woman who says what she means. I want you to know, she said, that I'm so glad you were there last night, and I hope you'll be part of our family events going forward, properly, as yourself. I thanked her. Judge Lockwood shook my hand in the front hallway as I was leaving. He said he hoped we'd see each other again at the next advisory committee meeting. He said he'd been meaning to reach out about a speaking engagement at his courthouse's annual judicial conference, and would I be interested? I said yes, of course I said yes. My father carried my bag to the car. He hugged me at the door, a real one, the kind he used to give me when I was small, before the years of managed distance set in. He said he was going to come to Boston sometime, that he wanted to see where I lived, see what I'd built. I'd like that, I told him. My mother cried a little, which is very unlike her, and which she covered up by pretending she had something in her eye. I let her pretend. On the plane, I sat in the window seat and watched Boston come into view below me, the harbor, the skyline, the city that had remade me, and I felt something that took me a minute to identify. Peace. Not the peace of vindication, not the peace of having won something. I want to be very clear about this, because stories like this one are easy to read as triumph over the people who underestimated you, a satisfying reversal, a wineglass dropped in shock. But that's not what I was feeling in that moment. I was feeling the peace of someone who had finally been seen by the people she loved, not just acknowledged, actually seen, in all the complexity of who I had become. And it mattered, not because I needed it to validate the work I'd done, but because we are all, at the end of the day, still the children who sat at our parents' dinner tables hoping to be loved well. I texted Keisha when I landed. I texted Dante. I called Medina from the cab home and told her everything, and she laughed so hard at the wineglass part that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai place on Tremont Street. I ate it on my couch in the quiet of my apartment, my houseplants green and overachieving in the window light, Boston humming its evening hum outside. And I realized, genuinely happy. I've thought about that dinner a lot since October. Not about the wineglass, not about the moment Judge Lockwood called me Your Honor, while Michelle stood there recalibrating everything she thought she knew. Those moments are satisfying to tell, but they're not the point. The point is the decade before them. The point is every quiet morning in a Boston library when I chose to keep going. Every night of bar prep when I didn't call home because I already knew the call would leave me feeling emptier than before it. Every hearing, every brief, every conference, every moment of showing up in rooms where I had no guaranteed place, and making one anyway. The point is that no one handed me the version of myself that walked into that dining room in McLean. I built her, piece by piece, year by year, in the way that people build themselves when the people who should be cheering for them have chosen not to look. I am not saying my family is made of villains. I am not saying my parents are bad people or my sister is irredeemable. Life is considerably more complicated than that. People fail each other all the time, not from malice but from limitation, from the narrowness of their own vision, from the stories they inherit and repeat without examining. What I am saying is this. If you are the overlooked one, if you are the quiet one, the one whose ambitions don't fit neatly into someone else's narrative of success, your work is real. The direction you are walking is real. The life you are building, even when you're building it alone, even when no one at the dinner table is asking about it, that life has weight and substance and meaning. You do not need permission to matter. You do not need someone else's eyes to confirm your worth. You need time and discipline and the stubborn bone-deep refusal to let someone else's story about you become the story you tell yourself. I have friends who have carried wounds like mine for decades without healing, not because they weren't capable of healing, but because they kept waiting for the people who hurt them to finally see them clearly, and the recognition never came, and so they stayed stuck, waiting, carrying the old wounds like credentials. Don't wait. I'm begging you. Don't wait. Build your life. Do your work. Become who you were made to be, with or without an audience, with or without the approval of the people whose approval you were trained to need. And if the recognition comes, if there is ever a moment when someone in the room finally sees you for who you actually are, and it happens in front of the people who spent years looking through you, let it be a footnote, not the point, a footnote. Because the real story was already written, in the years they weren't watching. I'm Katrina Tancredi. I'm 28 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Boston with exposed brick walls and too many plants, and I work every single day at something that matters to me in a world that sometimes felt, growing up, like it had already decided I didn't matter. And I am here to tell you, with everything I have, that the world's verdict on you is not final. Your family's verdict on you is not final. The story someone told about you when you were 14 or 17 or 22 does not have to be the story you live inside for the rest of your life. You can outgrow it. You can outbuild it. You can walk into a room one day and have someone look at you with full, clear recognition, and it will not feel like revenge. It will feel like arrival. Like the moment you finally close a chapter you'd been rereading for years. If this story meant something to you, if it reached the part of you that has been quietly keeping score, quietly grinding, quietly daring to believe that the version of yourself you're becoming is worth becoming, please subscribe. Not for me, for yourself. Because subscribing is how you tell this community, I'm here, I'm in this. I believe that the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who kept going anyway, we deserve a place to tell our stories and hear each other's. You are not alone in this. Whatever you're carrying, whatever table you've been made to feel unwelcome at, whatever version of yourself you've been protecting from people who wouldn't have appreciated it anyway, you are not alone. And neither, it turns out, am I. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best, if you've ever felt the particular specific sting of being introduced as the disappointment, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell, and stay with me, because I have more stories like this one. And something tells me you do too. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. Now go build something.